Hey, greetings everybody. It is GleeCon back again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. On our last one, we played some World of Warcraft Classic and dipped our toes into Darkshore, literally dipping our toes into some water as we did some fishing quests and hunted for crabs and such. Looks like it's going to be a nice zone. I don't know how long each one's going to go, but we did it as a night elf druid, and we finally got the ability to turn into bear form, so that's pretty cool. We've also been reading the World of Warcraft role-playing game, Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting, source book set. As we get kind of near the end of that, we've been reading the Horde Player's Guide. We're now moving on to Chapter 6 of that. In Chapter 5, we talked about technology and some technological kind of items, wonders that can be equipped specifically by the Horde. And now we're going to get into the coolest part of this book. Chapters 6 and 7, maybe even a little bit beyond, are all about the actual lore, the lore of the Horde, as races in Chapter 6, and then as an institution, as an organization in Chapter 7. So this is where we don't want to skip anything. It's going to be very cool. It is very dense though. So for the first time in this book, we're going to break it down, and instead of doing the entire chapter in an episode, we're going to break it down by race. So on this episode, stay a while and listen as we do Chapter 6 and talk about the Orc history within the Horde on Azeroth, and in general, even beyond on Draenor. And as a sidebar to begin, will Bran ever finish his book? I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Right now, in fact. I've been around and I've seen a lot. I've traveled all the lands in Azeroth and have written about them. I've rubbed shoulders with kings and queens and giant bugs. Yet I don't know if I'll ever see anything as fascinating to me as mortal societies. The history and cultures of the Horde's races are particularly interesting. They span worlds and have undergone vast changes in their mentalities over the generations. What this means for their societies is fascinating. I've made no secret of the fact that I think the hostilities between the Alliance and the Horde are foolishness. We need to work together against the real bad guys. Perhaps if our peoples can learn to understand each other, such a day might come to pass. Thus, to facilitate such understanding, I've compiled my notes and thoughts in the following sections. Enjoy. Bran Bronzebeard. So that also speaks to why we're going to be reading all of it, because Bran takes things from a lore perspective. Okay, Orc history. Creatures who embody absolute irredeemable evil do exist. However, regardless of what is said in some quarters, the name of that creature is not Orc. They do not hate life, nor do they exult in cruelty and deceit like the commanders of the Burning Legion. Yes, they can be vicious brutes, and you don't want to get on their bad sides unless you've got a good sword arm and perhaps an army at your call and a mage or two. Yes, when they slay your family and raze your homestead to the ground, I can understand when you want to turn their names into cuss words. However, let's face facts. Orcs do not spend their every waking moment practicing new ways to torture people, nor do they spend time thinking about new ways to torment you. If they did, they'd probably be less deadly. Okay, I know that no one's going to listen to me, but that's never stopped me before, so let's talk about orcs. Where do we begin? I suppose it all began in a swamp, on a world far away. A sunlit marsh on a lost world where the first orc crawled around the murks of Draenor and built crude shelters and raised pillars to honor the spirits. In the summerlands of Draenor, where steam rose from fissures and wild vegetation, flowers and ferns, orcs broiled and baked themselves in pursuit of the spirits, contemplating the universe in sweat lodges, and going on vision quests. I'm taking some creative liberties with rumors here. We have no idea about the early days of orc history. On Draenor, the early orcs learned primitive arts, building, farming, mining. They developed the twin traditions of shamanism, to answer the great mysteries of the world, and clans to govern their lives. Their faith also included a respect and reverence for their ancestors. My knowledge of this time is sketchy, but I've put together some myths and some stories orcs have told me over the years. Eventually, not too many decades ago, the orc shaman Ner'zhul allowed the demon Kil'jaeden to use him to spread bloodlust and savagery throughout the orc clans. Of course, it was Kil'jaeden's idea in the first place to use the orcs against Azeroth to soften up Azeroth's defenses before the Burning Legion's second invasion. Kil'jaeden also manipulated Ner'zhul into leading the orc race in attacking the Draenor. The two races clashed numerous times, but neither gained the advantage. Ner'zhul refused to take the final step. He resisted Kil'jaeden's command to make the orc race drink demon blood, thus endowing the orcs with demonic powers, and devote itself entirely to the pursuit of death and war. Ner'zhul would pay for that resistance later. Ner'zhul sensed that obeying Kil'jaeden in these things would cause his people to be enslaved to hatred forever. Frustrated and infuriated by Ner'zhul's resistance, Kil'jaeden turned to the old shaman's ambitious apprentice Gul'dan. In return for Gul'dan's obedience, Kil'jaeden promised Gul'dan untold power. Gul'dan agreed, and, steeped in demonic magic, became the most powerful mortal warlock in history. He spread his arcane teachings among the clans and strove to eradicate the orcs' shamanistic traditions. Kil'jaeden helped Gul'dan found the Shadow Council, a secretive sect that manipulated the clans and spread the use of warlock magic throughout Draenor. Under Blackhand and Gul'dan and the Shadow Council, the orcs renewed their attack on the Draenor. The orcs' attacks were devastating, especially after Gul'dan and the other warlocks began summoning demons to fight the Draenor. It was also around this time that the orcs appointed Blackhand as the Horde's first war chief. Before the last big battle between the orcs and the Draenor, all the orcs except Durotan and the Frostwolf clan drank the blood of the mighty pit lord Manaroth, the Destructor. Hate and bloodlust and great power overwhelmed the orcs. Their demon-fueled rage sealed the fate of the struggling Draenor. As the war wound down, Kil'jaeden, pleased with the results of his machinations, broke off further contact with the Horde. With the Draenor defeated, the orcs had no further significant enemies to fight. They eventually turned on one another. Bereft of anything big enough to challenge the Horde, and lost without further demonic guidance, Gul'dan soon realized that the Horde was going to devour it itself. Fortunately for the orcs, another outside force contacted Gul'dan. This being was the guardian Medivh, though at this point possessed by the spirit of Sargeras. Medivh showed Gul'dan the way to Azeroth. Gul'dan saw a way to sate his people's bloodlust, at least temporarily, and to conquer and enslave another world. Medivh Sargeras created the first dark portal, and the orcs, again united with a common cause, poured through. Okay, so we've just recapped everything of the orcs' history leading up to the First War. And so the First War began. Blackhand amassed his army near Stormwind. The human defenders were unprepared. A group of human heroes slowed the invasion by slaying Medivh, but the First War ended with the orcs' ascendant, the kingdom of Stormwind firmly in the Horde's grasp, King Lane dead, and the humans fleeing north across the sea. Sometimes I wonder what the difference is between the First and Second War. Except for a 2-year respite between the conquest of Stormwind and the invasion of Lordaeron, there certainly wasn't much peace, nor any hope of peace. Those who went as embassies to sue for peace with Gul'dan returned to their peoples as undead mockeries. Arrogant brute. Even with the death of his ally Medivh, the warlock believed that no force on Azeroth could stop him, and so the Horde built ships and followed the humans north, begetting the Second War. I don't know what goes through the minds of creatures like Gul'dan. If he wasn't so selfish, I don't think any force could have stopped the conquest of Lordaeron for all the alliance's elven puissance and human valor and dwarven ingenuity, but Gul'dan just didn't care about the Horde. He cared far more about gaining power for himself. Gul'dan and several loyal orc clans deserted the Horde. The warlock raised a chain of islands and invaded the tomb of the demon Sargeras in an attempt to ascend to godhood. Orgrim Doomhammer could not abide this. Okay, so now we've recapped our way through the First War and we're at the end of the Second. Let's read this sidebar real quick. I wish to fight him. Wait, actually, I can't. I think maybe this is a human. I wish to fight him, father, Rufus announced. The youth had been staring at the young gladiator orc, Thrall, for an entire evening. Several of the mercenaries who were spectators for the spectacle spat out their drinks. Don't be absurd, Morgan snapped at his son. He's an orc and you are a highborn. Thrall, standing alone in the pit, stared back at the unexpected challenger. There was a look in the boy's eye that he'd never seen in the faces of the drunkards and shady dealers that his master regularly brought to Durnhold. It was a look he could respect. Thrall smiled slightly, even though he didn't understand the emotion. I want no damage done to my property, Blackmore shouted. Not that your runt would stand a prayer against my thrall, Morgan. The spectators laughed, but Morgan responded to the boast with a snarl and almost drew his sword. The young Rufus grabbed his father's shoulder and, aided by his father's inebriated state, managed to hold him in his chair. Morgan glowered in response, but Rufus returned the expression and cowed him. Then the youth stepped forward, untied his purse, and threw it at Blackmore's feet. 5 gold should suffice for a fee, the youth barked. There does not need to be any blood or injury, only combat, wrestling or battle sticks. Let it be his choice. I would not have my son wrestling with an orc like 2 brats rolling around in the straw, Morgan said. I would know as my grandfather knows how an orcish heart beats when battle is upon him, Rufus answered. If I should be called upon to make war against their breed, I would know their spirit. One of the merchants sighed. Morgan, that's what you get when you tell your offspring too many war stories, the captain chafed at their laughter. Let the boys fight, another mercenary added. It'll be entertaining. Such impudence deserves its reward. Seeking to punish the wayward, this is back into our recap, wayward orcs for their costly betrayal, Doomhammer sent his forces to kill Gul'dan and bring the renegades back into the fold. For his recklessness, Gul'dan was torn apart by the maddened demons he had set loose. With their leader dead, the renegade clans quickly fell before Doomhammer's enraged legions. Though the rebellion had been quelled, the Horde was unable to recoup the terrible losses it had suffered. Gul'dan's betrayal had afforded the Alliance not only hope, but also time to regroup and retaliate. Okay, so our sidebar there was obviously kind of the interstitial period between the Second and the Third War, maybe even during the Second War, but it's showing some of the stories we've already read about the rise of Thrall. Lord Lothar, seeing that the Horde was fracturing from within, gathered the last of his forces and pushed Doomhammer south back into the shattered heartland of Stormwind. There, the Alliance forces trapped the retreating Horde within the volcanic fortress of Blackrock Spire. Lothar and Doomhammer met each other on the battlefield, and Doomhammer slew the human lord. However, his death incited a righteous anger in the Alliance forces. They defeated Doomhammer's army and pushed the Horde back to the Swamp of Sorrows where the Dark Portal rested. The orcs hoped to meet with reinforcements from Draenor. The reinforcements never came. The Alliance was not kind toward the Horde survivors. They shackled them until they ran out of chains in which to fetter them, and forced them to march to internment camps. The war ended in disaster for the Horde, but the worst was yet to come. Back in Draenor, Ner'zhul chafed at his bargain with Kil'jaeden, and sought a way to power that circumvented the Burning Legion. Seeing Gul'dan's success with the Dark Portal, the shaman figured he could open new portals and lead his people to a place where the Burning Legion wouldn't trouble him. This was not a bad idea, but Ner'zhul had neither Gul'dan's knowledge nor his skill. More than one portal on Draenor caused a magical instability that rocked the world to its core. Volcanoes rose out of the burning plains and unleashed fumes and tumults in every region of the world. Seas rose in wild storms that shattered coastlines. Realizing that their world was doomed, 2 of Ner'zhul's best generals, Grom Hellscream and Kilrog Deadeye, abandoned their lord and rallied as many orcs as they could find, driving them through the Dark Portal to the questionable safety of Azeroth, just before Draenor was destroyed in a mighty explosion that shook the twisting nether itself. Unfortunately, Ner'zhul and the warlocks of his Shadowmoon clan also survived the cataclysm. They traveled through a portal and fell into the unforgiving claws of Kil'jaeden, who was furious at the shaman for defying him years ago on Draenor. Ner'zhul and his followers were tortured, broken, and transformed into the Lich King of Northrend and his followers. Eventually, they would create the Scourge. If there is any darkness in my soul, it's in what I'd do to kill Jaden if ever I had the power to pass judgment on him for birthing that atrocity. Okay, so that was basically a recap of wrapping up the Second War and even beyond the Dark Portal. One interesting note here is a small evolution yet to come, where they talk about how the reason why Kil'jaeden is furious with Ner'zhul is because of when he defied him way back before the First War. That's not the case. Kil'jaeden already had his just rewards at that point in time. He was mad that basically he tried to escape him rather than doing his service or whatever, that he tried to escape him at the end of Beyond the Dark Portal. That was the anger. So Kil'jaeden already had his laughs and humiliated Ner'zhul, and Ner'zhul was trying to, I don't know, rip another way to another world to escape him, and that's what Kil'jaeden was pissed about. He wanted to use him to continue the assault or whatever. Not just escape and try to do his own thing. So when he messed up and went into the void, well, that's when Kil'jaeden said, okay, now you're really mine. Orcish primer. Here are a few, this is a sidebar, of the more common Orcish phrases. Orcish is a coarser language than Common, and many words lack the subtlety of Common. Orcs rely on context, repetition, and volume to add emphasis or meaning. Akamagosh, a blessing on you and yours. Dabu, I obey. Golkosh, by my axe. Gog, run. Loknarash, arm yourselves. Loktar, victory, a war cry, also a greeting while in combat. Loktar Ogar, victory or death, a war cry. Swobu, as you command. Thrumka, well met, a greeting. Zugzug, acknowledgement and agreement, roughly the equivalent of okay. Nice. Despite the arcane energy that ravaged the world, Draenor wasn't completely destroyed. Some pieces of Draenor, now called Outland, survived the cataclysm. Rumors say it is nightmarish if it only is a base for the Burning Legion. Call me crazy, but I hope to see it someday. Maybe in a future book. In the meantime, the vast majority of the Horde on Azeroth was imprisoned in internment camps. The Alliance survivors were not in a kindly mood. Most felt that orcs were nothing but animals. Some even urged mass exterminations. The defeated orcs were remarkably dull and docile, rousing themselves only to whine unanswered prayers to demon gods to save them. The warlocks of the Horde, acolytes of the demon religion of Ner'zhul, were almost entirely slain. With the effects of the blood of Manaroth fading from their veins, the orcs felt weak and uncertain. I should note that a few orc clans, including Grom Hellscream and his war songs, eluded capture. At this point, a new champion arose, the greatest leader in the orcs' thousands of years of history. His name was Thrall, son of the orc chieftain Durotan, supposedly the sole orc chieftain who had refused to partake of demon blood. Tales say assassins of the Blackrock clan murdered Durotan and the infant Thrall was left to die. A scheming human named Blackmore rescued him, however. Blackmore felt an orc of such noble lineage could be trained to be a puppet who would keep the defeated orcs in line. He gave him the name Thrall and raised him as a gladiator to fight and kill other orcs for human amusement. So now we're in between that, Beyond the Dark Portal and the Third War. Also, there's another little ticky-tack thing right there. Blackmore didn't know anything about Thrall's heritage. He just found an orc and wanted to train him. He didn't know he was noble. Thrall didn't even really know that. Thrall did not live up to his name. Blackmore wanted Thrall to be knowledgeable of military tactics and history so that he would be a good fighter and a good leader in combat, and the human commanded tutoring for Thrall. However, Thrall received far more education than Blackmore intended. This was thanks to a human friend of Thrall's, Taratha Foxton, whose mother, Clania Foxton, had nursed Thrall when he was a baby. Taratha secretly smuggled books to Thrall, books about all sorts of non-military topics. Again, ticky-tack. He wanted him to be that good so that he could lead his own army of orcs in an uprising against the rest of the Alliance And he was trained by that dude that I can't remember the guy's name, but that was like the military commander of Blackmoor. Taratha did maybe probably temper Thrall's militaristic side with humanity, and that might be unintended. And she maybe continued smuggling him some books, so it's a kind of a combo. When I think he began to be cut off or something like that, she kept letting him read. I don't think so, actually. I think he was allowed to read, and she would just smuggle him the messages in the books. Finally, after enduring years of punishment and cruelty, Thrall escaped from human control before he could be broken. After months of wandering, Thrall tracked down Grom Hellscream and his band of warsong orcs. After passing a series of tests, Grom told Thrall about a group of orcs who took refuge in the far north, who still honored the old orc ways, the Frostwolf clan. Taking his leave of the grim chieftain, Thrall ventured into the north. After more months of searching, he finally encountered the Frostwolves, who identified Thrall as Duratan's son and the rightful clan heir. Thrall stayed with the clan and learned shamanism from Drekthar, an old shaman. In doing so, Thrall realized how far his people had fallen. They needed to be liberated in body and spirit from the captivity of man and the poison of demons. Eventually, Thrall encountered the old orc chief Orgrim Doomhammer, who had been living a hermitic existence since the end of the Second War. He sensed a power and purity of spirit in Thrall that he had not felt in decades. He taught Thrall cunning tactics to quickly attack an enemy and retreat before there could be reprisal. Later, when Doomhammer fell in battle, he appointed Thrall as the Horde's new war chief. Taking up Doomhammer's weapon, Thrall vowed to free every orc in Azeroth from the internment camps and set about doing just that. And there's a picture of Thrall. I think it's probably supposed to be Thrall, or at least it's just some internment camp orcs with either a random human or this could be Blackmoor. It could go either way. Thrall's name began to be heard on every lip in Azeroth, and Alliance commanders were left to wonder just what they were doing wrong in allowing some upstart war chief to assemble a new horde. Unfortunately, before the Alliance could organize its magi, diviners, and paladins in a concerted effort to destroy this new horde, another threat emerged, the Scourge. Most of us know what happened then. As the opening movements of the Third War played, Thrall, after assembling his horde and engaging it in a little revenge against Blackmoor, received a call from a mysterious prophet to take his horde across the sea to the shores of Kalimdor, sparing them from the ravages of the Scourge. He did so, and on the way he met and befriended the jungle trolls. Upon arriving in Kalimdor, Thrall arrived in the Barrens, where he made the acquaintance of Cairn Bloodhoof, chieftain of the Bloodhoof Tauren. It was here orcs and Tauren sealed their alliance, and the Tauren joined the Horde. Despite Thrall's alliances, the work of the orcs was being undone by one of their own. Grom Hellscream had been ordered to avoid conflict in Kalimdor, but was drawn into battle against humans and then angered the local night elves by ravaging their forests. Surrounded by enemies, Grom found a spring that had been tainted with the blood of Manaroth. Grom and his warriors drank of the spring and became powerful enough to defeat the elves and to slay the demigod Cenarius. Immersed in demonic bloodlust, Grom and his fell orcs no longer wished to follow Thrall. Filling his ranks with demons, Grom established a base at the edge of the Barrens. Thrall was determined to save his old friend from damnation. Thrall fought his way to Grom and smacked him back to his senses. Grom was repentant and both burned to defeat the creature that had manipulated and murdered their people for centuries. They encountered Manaroth in a mountain pass, and Grom sacrificed himself to kill the demon. Despite his earlier transgressions, the Horde now sees Grom Hellscream as one of its foremost heroes. Thrall had little time to mourn. Soon, from across the sea came the demon Archimonde and the Scourge, striking for the World Tree and the Well of Eternity it protected. Once again warned by the mysterious prophet, who turned out to be Medivh reborn, Thrall united with Jaina Proudmoore and opposed Archimonde. Together, they destroyed Archimonde and scattered the Burning Legion's forces. Okay, here's a sidebar. Blackmoor handed each of them a quarterstaff with slightly padded tips, ignoring young Rufus's request to let Thrall decide the battle. "Don't bore us, or I might not pull him off you." Rufus removed his cape, hat, and tunic and jumped down into the pit. Thrall, sensing the drama of the moment, snarled slightly. He knew that it pleased his master. Rufus bowed. Thrall thought it was an odd gesture and stepped back into a combat stance. Thrall charged. The two clashed near the center of the pit, grinding their sticks together in a test of strength. Thrall was immersed like a sunken ship in battle, but He still managed to admire the fire in his opponent's eyes. Thrall muscled Rufus down to one knee, but the human rolled out of the way of Thrall's attempted finishing blow. Rufus caught Thrall with a hard smack to the back of his ankle that swept the orc off his feet, but Thrall blocked a downward follow-up, countering it with a blow to Rufus's arm that tested the strength of the bone. The human howled in pain, spun and went back to his fighting stance. He was smiling slightly. "Try that again," he said. Thrall grunted in response. The fight continued with the exchange of numerous blows. Thrall was clearly the stronger, but his opponent was no weakling. Rufus was clearly the quicker, but the orc was no sluggard. The combat lasted for a minute, then 2, then 3. Both youths fought at a dizzying pace. Sweat covered their bodies, lending a red torchlight glow even to a green-skinned orc. Finally, Thrall managed to back Rufus into a corner and make his move. When Rufus tried to spin away from him at close quarters, Thrall anticipated the move, spun and drove the butt end of his staff upward, landing it squarely in the human's solar plexus. Rufus gasped for breath. His knees buckled. Thrall spun again and landed a solid blow to the side of the head that would have cracked the human's skull had it not been for the padding. Beaten, Rufus fell to his back. The merchants cheered. Morgan and a few of his mercenary friends silently scowled. Thrall stared at his opponent, who moaned as he got to his feet, but strangely smiled once he had regained his footing. Thrall realized that the battle was over, allowed himself to relax. Rufus extended his hand. "Well done, savage," the human said. Thrall had no idea what the gesture meant and wasn't sure how to put his emotion into words. He had never been taught to express respect. He reached for the hand. "What foolishness is this?" Morgan shouted. "My son will not shake hands with an orc. Get him out of that pit at once," he demanded. Alright, so that's the continuation of a kind of a never before heard small, very small side tale of Thrall as an orc gladiator. Triumphant, Thrall set about building a new nation for his people, Durotar, named after his father. However, his people's bloody past would come back to haunt them. Jaina's father, Grand Admiral Dalen Proudmoore, a hero of the Second War, was determined to wipe out the Horde once and for all before they could get a foothold in Kalimdor. Even given the orcs' brutal history, I can understand Proudmoore's initial anger, but he didn't change his mind, even in the face of evidence, so sadly I have to slap him with the big fat jerk brand. Jaina tried to reason with her father, but Admiral Proudmoore called her naive and said she'd been deceived. Realizing that her father wouldn't budge in his hate, Jaina Proudmoore was forced into making a choice that only a Lord of the Burning Legion could enjoy. She could either dishonor her alliance with Thrall or help slay her father. Poor girl. First she falls in love with somebody who destroys Lordaeron, and then she allies with her father's arch-enemy. Rumors say she and the Blood Elf leader Kael'thas once had a thing too. She's certainly not the luckiest woman in history. Thrall promised to spare as many humans as possible in the invasion of Theramore, the new alliance capital off the coast of Kalimdor. In the end, Jaina sided with the Horde. Thrall's champion, the half-ogre Rexxar, slew Dalen Proudmoore, and Jaina assumed leadership of the alliance in Theramore and pledged herself to the truce with the Horde. However, the truce barely holds in Kalimdor, let alone in the rest of Azeroth. So, as you can see right there, that basically skips over the entire Frozen Throne expansion of Warcraft 3, because other than the very, very end and the intro chapter, because the Horde, quite frankly, had very little to do with that war. Recently, Thrall dissolved the traditional orc clans so that no further arbitrary decisions could separate one orc from another. Thus, most orc clans no longer exist. Beyond Durotar, however, remnants of the old clans survive, particularly among the Blackrock and Dragonmaw clans who have no part in the current Horde. I guess that's why you can fight them sort of as mobs. These clans accept warlocks into their ranks, so they haven't abandoned their demonic heritage. Another lurking poison that waits to seep into the wound is the Shadow Council, Gul'dan's old band of ghouls, figuratively speaking, were never completely destroyed. Rumors place them in Felwood. When they decide to leave their bolt hole, we might be in trouble. We saw that what Kel'Thuzad could accomplish on his own. The Council is an entire league of Arc warlocks, and Theramore and Durotar's defenses against magic are not as great as I would wish. And that is why both the Horde and the Alliance are in such a bloody mess today, and why it's not likely to get any better anytime soon. Okay, we'll continue on by talking about orc culture. Even though the orcs no longer behave like brutal savages, they have not abandoned the martial spirit that consumed their souls for the past centuries. The way of the orc requires discipline and courage. Orcs are such physically powerful creatures that if they were incapable of controlling their rages, they'd kill each other over minor insults. To avoid unnecessary death and bloodshed, long ago the orcs developed a rigid and sophisticated code of honor. Politically, the orcs have been in transition over the last decade as they move from a clan structure to a more traditional monarchist structure. Led by the young and charismatic Thrall and freed from the effects of the demon bloodthirst, the orcs of Kalimdor find themselves increasingly drawn away from their old tribal structures to establish themselves as citizens of the great orc nation. In the old days, orcs were a patriarchal society. Men were men and women knew their place. Thanks to the policies of Thrall, however, women have much greater freedom in orc society. Orc women are free to take the same tests as men, to pursue careers as shaman and warriors, and gain as much honor in society as men. One area in which orcs might be seen as backwards is in their treatment of peons, the poor wretches. Orcs who fail to pass the tests of a warrior or shaman, or who have no desire to pass the test, often become peons. Peons are the lowest of the low in orc society. While they're not technically slaves, they effectively fill that role as peasants do in the Alliance. They're not wrong. The lot of peons is so low that one of the tests of a new warrior is to sneak into the fields and use blackjacks to wake peons who are sleeping on the job. Hey, that's a call to Warcraft Classic there, in the Valley of Trials. Warriors occupy the highest strata of orc society. All young men and women who pass the test of strong flesh are expected to receive some training, knocking each other's heads, and training among the battle masters of Orgrimmar is considered among the highest honors that a warrior can obtain. They do not fight for the pleasure of others or even for the joy of the kill. For orcs, skilled combat is sport. Much like wrestling or running on the village common serves human children, or mine racing for dwarves. It is also, I fear, a part of Thrall's personality cult. Because the great orc was a gladiator in his youth, young orcs are expected to emulate him almost without question. Because orcs value honor, challenges are commonplace. These are rarely duels, rather they take the forms of physical challenges that tasks each orc with something other than personal combat. Some are tests of skill, climbing a particular mountain and retrieving a treasure from its peak. Some are tests of endurance, lasting in a desert in the height of summer. Some are tests of ferocity, forcing a wild beast to withdraw from a confrontation without striking a blow. When a young orc wishes to prove himself to an established warrior, it's expected that the orc will be put through a series of grueling tests. Sometimes orcs apply these tests to members of other races who wish to prove themselves, even humans and dwarves. I suppose being treated like an orc is intended as a sign of respect. Here's a few orc sayings in a sidebar. By Manaroth's blood, fear is for the enemy. Weakness brings only death. Steel and thunder before meat and slumber. War first, ask questions after humans are dead. Bloodthirst is the only thirst. Aside from warriors, the other honored group is the shaman, who are masters of the spirit just as warriors are masters of the body. The shaman is the explorer of the elements, which are as essential to the orc religion as the light is to humans. Shaman are both masters and slaves of the natural world. Some of the greatest orc shaman train as farseers. Those who show great aptitude train and even live among the spirits in the Valley of Spirits, the spiritual heart of Orgrimmar. As Thrall combines both martial prowess and shamanism, he exemplifies the current orc mindset. Here's some other sidebar tidbits on orc culture. Is concerned with survival over artistic achievement. It reveres its elderly and honors its ancestors. It does not apologize for past actions, nor does it demand apologies from its enemies. It values valor over cunning as long as valor doesn't lead to disaster. Resembles primitive human societies, but is far more sophisticated when examined closely, and distrusts arcane magic, especially the magic of warlocks, but does not yet shun arcanists. Arcanists, such as magi, still hold some power in orc society. They are not loved, but they are useful, so they are tolerated. This does not, however, apply to warlocks. Because of their links to the Burning Legion, warlock strongholds are razed when they are found, and warlocks are forced to operate in secret in Durotar. However, beyond Thrall's reach, orc clans still embrace the hateful little invokers as warmly as a fire imp kissing the embers of a burnt-out building. I've heard some say that a new generation of warlocks is secretly gathering in Durotar to use their craft to protect the realm from demonic forces. If these reports be true, that lot ought to talk with the Blood Elves. As one observer commented, most of Azeroth's problems stem from the fact that the elves couldn't hold their magic. For orc warriors and shaman, life is a series of trials. In Durotar, young warriors and barbarians who graduate from the pits are sent into the Valley of Trials, a hunting ground that's expected to prepare them for battle. Here they hunt relatively weak prey and hone their skills. Likewise, shaman and priests are expected to travel out into the plains and commune with spirits, learning to heed the spirits' voices. From the Tauren, orcs have adopted sweat lodges and other practices designed to test the body and bring it closer to the elements. A few grumble that Tauren religious practices have become so commonplace in Durotar that they've effectively been conquered again, but such grumblings are, at least for now, muted. Okay, let's continue our side of our story of Thrall. The bodies of Admiral Proudmoore's forces lay scattered over the battlefield, or this is a different sidebar. Although most of the bloodshed had been averted, not all of Proudmoore's knights had surrendered upon his death. A few were fanatical in their hatred of the Horde. A few were fanatical to their duty. Thrall allowed Jaina to accompany him in the grim task of inspecting the battlefield so she could identify her father's most cherished knights and allowed their corpses to be tended with honor. In a field of tall grasses, a handsome red-haired knight lay dead upon the ground. 2 arrows were lodged in his back. A half-score of wounds marked his body, but his face was unmarred. 4 orc soldiers, all of high rank, also lay dead within 6 paces of the corpse. Here the battle had been particularly fierce. Though dead, the battle light had not completely dimmed in the eyes of Sir Rufus Montaigne. Sir Rufus, Jaina sighed, recognizing the fallen by crest and reputation. A heavy loss, she added. His grandfather fought alongside my father in the Second War. Rufus's father had gotten into shady dealings, so he left home in his youth and pledged his service to my family. His honor was... Without stain, Thrall said admiringly. He grew into a great warrior. Jaina wondered at her ally's turn of phrase. Did you know him? Yes, Thrall nodded as he bent over the body. He taught me about respect. He was a very good teacher, the great orc said. He closed the dead soldier's eyes. That's a touching little kind of evolution of that story. And we'll have a sidebar about half-orcs as well. Since the beginning of the First War, orcs have interbred with a number of species. Mostly humans, but half-ogres and half-Draenei are not unheard of. For the most part, half-orcs live in Barrymore or Orgrimmar and attempt to coexist with their parent races. There, half-orcs are under suspicion at the best of times and viewed as possible traitors at the worst. They fearlessly pursue chances for advancement, be it jobs in Theramore or opportunities to take the tests in Orgrimmar. Their courage and ferocity has won them respect in some quarters, but it's also made them many enemies. Half-elves, despite the potential for rivalry, are sympathetic to their cause. On the Horde side, most Tauren are bewildered over why anyone would hate half-orcs, and do not hesitate to teach or befriend them. Goblins admire their willingness to take risks and often find employment for them, particularly in Ratchet. There are many instances where a half-orc's desire for acceptance has led her to take suicidal risks. In professions from mining to shipbuilding to herding, when things look dangerous, send in the half-orc and we're going to need another half-orc are common refrains. Young half-orcs can be easily manipulated into proving their courage in foolish dares or challenges. Sometimes this produces interesting results. The half-orc twins who mooned Thrall during a procession at the summer festival in Orgrimmar were ordered to repeat the act in the winter festival. When they did so in freezing weather, the amused Thrall inducted them into his guard. The way of the half-orc is generally unfair, unkind, and unwelcome. Nonetheless, where there's struggle, there's hope. Half-orcs are more welcome in the Horde than in the Alliance. The Tauren are remarkably welcoming, and as the orcs change their fundamental beliefs, they reinvent their views of half-orcs. Jungle trolls and Forsaken are apathetic about half-orcs, which is a far sight better than the distrust they see in Alliance lands. Half-orcs can belong to any profession, however they're most often suited to the roles of barbarian or warrior. With their great strength and quick tempers, it's a natural fit. Half-orcs are also skilled animal wranglers. Beasts view half-orcs as just another loud, foul, stinking, two-legged creature like orcs and humans, and many young half-orcs demonstrate considerable skill as beastmasters. Orcs expect trials of themselves and their compatriots, and orcs love to boast of their accomplishments. One thing they also expect of each other is humility. Just as Thrall paid homage to great predecessors like Doomhammer and Grom Hellscream, every orc is expected to revere his immediate elders. Shrines and memorials to ancestors are commonplace, and many orcs make pilgrimages to the memorials of great orcs, especially to the memorial of Grom Hellscream in Ashenvale, which is an important part of the Orc Autumn Harvest Festival. Battlefield remembrances are also important observances. Orcs share many of the common observances of humans, including coming of age, marriage, and funeral ceremonies. Orcs prefer to burn their dead. As orc religion revolves around the elements in nature, the equinox and solstice festivals are important. And yes, orcs have the Wintervale Festival too, and orc children wait on a green-skinned grandfather winter just as eagerly as dwarven and human children do. In fact, if there's anything that gives me hope that one day the Alliance and Horde will one day set aside their differences and unite for the good of Azeroth, it's in their mutual affinity for a kindly old man who loves to hand sweets to children. Yeah, it's kind of weird that they both like venerate old Father Winter or whatever, Grandfather Winter. We have a last sidebar on orc knowledge. What a character knows about orc history and culture depends on his intelligence and training, which a knowledge check represents. A hero who makes an appropriate knowledge check knows the following information about orcs as indicated at the indicated DC. So it takes no knowledge to know that orcs and humans have been enemies for decades, and most blame the orcs for starting the First and Second Wars. Okay, an average knowledge check, average knowledge of just local knowledge or the plains, knows that orcs come from another world called Draenor, but are now scattered across Azeroth. So pretty much any hero knows that, and about 50% of common people realize they come from Draenor. Okay, a little bit harder, a pretty moderate skill amount of knowledge is required to know that before the Third War, the Orc War Chief Thrall came to power, united his people, and led them to a new life in Kalimdor. So you got to be plugged in. Most common people don't really take the time to realize that fact, and even some heroes are blind to it. The same difficulty, while they were once savage demon worshippers, and some still are, most orcs now embrace shamanism and ancestor worship. So that distinction is something that is lost on most common people. And finally, it takes quite a bit of knowledge, so only the people that make it their business to know that long ago orcs made a pact with demons that tainted them with bloodlust, which is why many view them as savages. Thrall, however, helped his people overcome this taint. So most don't even go beyond the bigotry of knowing that. All right, so this one, none of the others have quite so long of a. This was by far the longest one, so we're still gonna break it down and do the rest of the races one at a time. There's a couple factions toward the end, but that are gonna be short, so it'll balance this one out. But we're gonna take some time going through just race by race on the rest of this chapter. Okay, thank you everyone. We got another episode in the pipe 5x5. As always, I appreciate you. Thank you so much for turning in, for watching, for liking, subscribing. I hope you get a little enjoyment out of it. Hopefully it's something just to buzz in the background, fill your knowledge with some lore and some knowledge of what we all love. And I will see you all next time on Lore of Warcraft.